welcome to an Appfigures chat. I'm Ariel from Appfigures, and I have with me Binh. And today we're going to be talking about competitive intelligence and how it's really the easiest way to get started with App Store optimization. But we're going to go a bit further and not just talk about App Store optimization, but talk about how competitive intelligence, both the qualitative side and the quantitative side, can help you progress better and make better decisions as you grow your app downloads. So without further ado, take it away, Binh. Tell us what you've done, where you come from, and how much you love ASO.
Sure. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm Binh. I'm originally from Vietnam. I came to Germany to study about 7 years ago. And after graduation, I think about 4 years ago, I started digging my way through the app marketing industry across multiple different agencies and also brands and so on and so forth. But my absolute kind of love would always be app store optimization, which brought me here with you guys today. Happy to be here. And thanks so much for hosting the chat today.
Thank you for joining us. I think you joined ASO just at the golden age of ASO. And I say golden age not in a sense that it just started, because ASO has been around for a long time, way before even 2015. But it's the right time because now ASO has materialized into something serious, like SEO for the web. I did SEO in what feels like a previous life, way back, many years ago, before even making Appfigures. And so I remember what that felt like. And it took a very long time, and eventually SEO became a real thing, and everyone does it. And it's a thing that you need. It's not a question of should I do it? Is it a good time? How should I go about it? And with ASO, I think we're getting to this point now, which is great. But one of the things that a lot of people ask me, and I hear this all the time, both from people who are using our platform, from people on forums, from people who I talk to randomly that I meet in these sort of things, and that's how do I get started? And if you think about starting with ASO, it's a lot more like starting with an app in general. How do you know what to build? How do you know what you need to price it? How do you know what you need to say about it to get people to download it? And there are multiple options. Option number one is you try and you see what happens and you iterate over time. And I think some people do that and they have time and they're okay with experimenting. But in some cases, you just want to get started and you want to hit it hard out of the gate. And my trick to doing that is to look at other apps, similar apps that have similar functionality, whether they're direct competitors or not, and see what they talk about, how they present their information, what sort of ads do they run. And so that's kind of a great way to kickstart it. But I don't hear enough people talk about them doing it. And when I first talked to Binh, he was like, yeah, that's how it should be done. So this feels perfect. How do you see this Binh kind of playing out? And we talked about quantitative, meaning the data, like what we have in the platform, and then qualitative, meaning actually talking to people and trying to figure out what's going on. What sort of things have you done that helped you kickstart ASO or helped you understand better where to go this way?
Yeah, so basically App Store optimization is like a strategic tool to help me answer why would users not download my app or our app, right? Because there's a ton out there. And I mean, if you think about users, mobile users, or in the digital kind of space or industry, everybody has a very limited attention span. They have like a couple of seconds to browse through a ton of different alternatives, right? And if you fail to stand out from the rest of the pack, from the crowd, then you fail to capture their attention, and then they're gonna either hate you or ignore you, and they're not gonna choose your app or choose to download your app. So the question is, why would they not download the app? Why would they not pay attention to our app? Why would my app not be able to stand out from the pack? Well, then the first thing I would do is look at what else is out there, spy on the competitors. Why would they pay more attention to the other apps, right? And then based on my insights, both quantitatively, for example, I spy on their market share, their installs, right? Their keyword rankings and also top charts rankings. And the qualitative side of things, for example, inside of the App Store and Play Store listings, what activities, what kind of assets are they currently showing? How are they communicating to the users from inside of the App Store? How are they replying to user reviews, and so on and so forth? And then I condense all of those learnings or insights into basically a playbook or a set of ideas or hypotheses, and then I start testing. But everything starts as a kind of foundation, starts from the outside, I would say, from what else is out there. What else? What am I losing out on? What's missing? Right. And by looking at and learning from other apps, I actually have a better understanding of what's missing in order to figure out a kind of space for improvement, and then rely on ASO to drill in there.
Wow. So much to unpack here. I think you covered pretty much everything that I can think of when it comes to this. But the idea that you're not looking for what you need to do in order to succeed, it's what you need to do in order to get ahead of the competition. That's so so fundamental to it just changes the way you think about what this is. So I think that's a great starting point, because it's not even what do I need to do to what do I need to do. It's what I need to do to be better, because at this point there are millions of apps and new ones are added every day. So everyone is trying to take that attention, and we all know that attention is limited, attention is finite, and attention is fleeting. So you have to be fast. So I want to start talking about maybe these in groups, so we can look at performance, which is a good way to even set a benchmark for what you should expect. And I think if you think about working with clients directly as a consultant, or if you work inside of a large organization, setting expectation is as important as actually optimizing, from what I know. And so we can start with that. But before we get into that, if anyone has any questions at any point, there's a Q&A panel. There's a button on the bottom. If you have a question, pop it in there. If we can answer it as we continue this discussion, we will. If not, there will be time at the end to both ask and answer questions. But feel free to put questions in the Q&A section. Oh, that was fast.
Wow. Okay, that's fast. Should I answer this now, or should I wait for?
It kind of fits exactly what I was just going to talk about. So yeah, why not?
Bidding on my own app name, I would assume that this is referring to adding your own brand keyword into a keyword set, or into your metadata. So let's say, naturally speaking, you just, because the way the App Store and Play Store search ranking algorithm works is they basically automatically recognize your own app name as a keyword there. So on a technical level, you don't have to. So that would be a waste. However, you have to go beyond the keyword level and have a look at the metadata as a text or copywriting asset. Does it look good without your own brand name, right? For example, if you have a look at your app name, as the name says, does your app name make sense without your app name, right? So that would be how I go about it. But if you talk about, say, advertising, for example, using Apple search ads, then it's not a waste. Reason is, if you don't bid on your own name, you can't protect your own name, and then other brands can, bid heavily on your own name and then push you down, for example. Yeah. But that's a different kind of story, not ASO.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. So I did a teardown of the Weather Channel earlier this week, and the Weather Channel has weather in its name, and they also want to optimize for weather, so they wanted to put weather at the beginning of their app name, but they didn't want the to stop them from getting pushed. And the reason is, if you look at if you just search for the keyword weather, you'll see that basically every app has weather in its name. And so what they ended up doing, even though weather is in their name, and I know this is tangentially related to this, but something that came to mind, is they included weather twice, even though we all know that that's going to get eliminated. The algorithm doesn't care about duplication, but the one that's going to get eliminated is the second one, and that's the name of their brand, and they were okay with that because the first keyword is weather in the name. And so it kind of makes sense, and it's kind of clever. I was really impressed by it. Not because it's something that is unheard of. I've seen that happen before, but to just do it is a great sort of great sort of tool, that sort of thinking. I have a feeling this question had to do with search ads specifically, so I think you answered that too. Um, my opinion is a little bit different. I think you should bid on your keyword in some cases, and in some cases not. It really depends. And so what I would do is I would keep an eye out for, are my competitors actually bidding on my keyword? And if they are, then try to fight them. Otherwise, not do it, because when users go into the App Store and they search for your name, search by name, they're most likely going to download your app. I would say 9 times out of 10, most apps are not replaceable by a competitor. Even though it may feel like it, may look like it, if you already search for the name specifically and not a feature of the app, it will lead to a download of your app. But, and in most cases, or in some cases, the ones that I've dealt with, competitors don't bid on the competitor's name because that gets really expensive. And so if you see that that's done, then you can go in, and if you see that that's reducing your downloads or your page views to begin with, then you can go in and spend some money on it. But otherwise, your users will end up clicking your ad thinking that's what it is and waste your money. So it depends on your strategy and how much money you can burn just to protect your mark. But let's zoom out a little bit, and we kind of dove into a technique more so than anything else. I want to talk about why do we need to look at competitors to understand, why do we need to set a benchmark when it comes to ASO? And
sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead. The end was not with a thought behind it.
Yeah, so in ASO, expectation would help you basically make sense of your KPIs. For example, how high is high enough? If you have a look at, for example, your conversion rate, say you have 25% conversion rate on Android, for example, from store listing visitors to store listing acquisitions or installers. And then you see your current performance level is at 25% conversion rate. Is it high? Is it high enough? There's no way to really tell. You have to compare it with, for example, a benchmark of a group of peers, for example, similar apps in the same category. That's the way to make sense of it. Another example is to have a look at your keywords. Say you have one focus keyword you really, really want to get your app to rank for, you really want to target it, but you're not sure how high your app can rank for. Say, is it going to be able to enter top 5? Well, then there's a very good way to estimate this or to set your expectations. Look at the number of other apps that are also ranking with this keyword. Say if you have to compete with 25,000 other apps, I would say this is usually not a good sign. I would aim for, say, below 1,000. A kind of extreme or extremely good case would be looking at keywords where there are just, say, 9 other apps ranking for it. Then your chance of entering top 10 would be 100%. Then that would be a little bit more promising. So that's the quantitative side of things. For the same topic of keywords, I can have a look at other qualitative data points as well. For example, what kind of apps exactly rank for each keyword? If you search for, say, shopping, like EDLO, like the app I'm currently doing ASO for, and then you see the top 10 apps that are ranking for that keyword are way above the league of my app, then it's not going to be a wise idea to try to compete with them, because I know for sure I'm probably not going to be able to enter top 10. Then I would navigate away from this keyword and target other keywords where I have a better chance. So it's all about spying on them again.
I think that you just also answer the question about what should I do if my ASO ranking stalls at 15 from, and I'm going to mess this up, Reniel, I think that's the name. But I think that's exactly it. So if you try to get to a keyword, you try to climb up and it just doesn't work, it probably means that at the top, the downloads are much higher than what you're currently getting. And remember, that's in the country, and in the case of Apple, that's based off of the last few days, 7 to 30 days, whereas on Google, it's based off of a much longer period. So instead of trying to compete for that keyword and just banging your head against the wall's not going to break unless you have the downloads. So it's much better to look for other keywords where your downloads are close enough. They don't have to be way higher. That would be ideal, of course. if you are better than the top 5. But if you can't find those, then find ones where you are close-ish. So you can make it into maybe the top 7, or maybe into the top 8, or maybe into the top 5. And hopefully those will give you the boost you need in downloads, so you can go then and compete with back on that other keyword that you really, really want. So ultimately, it's all really iterative, but by knowing what you're up against, you know if something is attainable right now or not. And if it isn't, you're just wasting your time and your keyword space, because keywords are limited. If we had infinite keywords, I think we would just shove everything into it. And that's kind of what SEO does, and that's why Google deals with it the way Google deals with it. But on the App Store and on Google Play in the app world, we only have a few characters, 30 and 30 on Apple, 50 and 80 on Google. So we want to focus on the ones where are attainable for us. And that's where spying on the competition not only makes sense, but it's kind of a requirement. Unless you know that from some other source, you have to know this in order to know what to optimize for. So that's a really good starting point. So not only can you tell what sort of expectation you can have when you reach that keyword, you can also tell if you can even get to that keyword. And those two kind of work together. And that's incredibly important, because if not, you're going to get stuck at 15, and then there's not really much you can do unless you pay for search ads, but then you're just throwing money on the problem, which isn't necessarily the solution. So we answered a question at the same time. There's a question I want to answer just quickly. Should we add competitor names in keyword tags in iOS? Absolutely not. Just like no, flat out no. If you read any of my teardowns, you know that I think that is the worst thing to do. What do you think about this, Binh?
I think yes and no. It really depends on what kind of keywords you're trying to target. Sometimes, from my own experience, sometimes for a few keywords that have something to do with the competitors' names, we tend to convert really well. But
Interesting.
yeah, we tend to convert really well, as in we get 20 something installs on average per day.
Okay.
Yeah, on estimate. And it depends on multiple different things. Number one is we know that our app, in terms of the technical performance, as in crash rate and so on and so forth, and also in terms of the quality of the product, we offer much better services, much better products. Then we have a better chance to, when we rank for it, and also the App Store assets as well, the App Store and the Play Store listings as well. We look better, for example.
More optimized.
We sound more trustworthy. Then when we rank for it, yeah, we can kind of communicate better. So even though when a user looks for a competitor, they have a specific kind of download intent, right? Heading towards that specific brand. When they see our app or our App Store presence inside of the App Store and the Play Store, for some reason, we managed to kind of change their mind and then convert them, like bring them to our site.
That is pretty amazing.
Yeah, it doesn't really happen every day, but for some really specific keywords, for some really specific apps where we know we stand a much better chance to basically ask their users to cheat on them and come to our site, then we would target those keywords. Also, we get more installs on average, and also faster as well. So, install velocity is a, very important keyword ranking factor. So then again, spying on them, spying on their app, like in what's happening inside of the app. Do we have better features? Can we showcase these features better? How have we been communicating to their users? Then we can basically just go in there, capture them. But that happens to, say, 20% of the cases. For the rest, of course, I would say avoid it.
That is, yeah, I think just like everything when it comes to ASO, it's the algorithm is not something super simple. So it's not just 2 ifs or 3 ifs, and we can go through all of them. So the kind of the rule of thumb is to not do that. In this case, that's kind of amazing that you don't come across this very often. And so I imagine that's the result of a lot of iteration and testing different keywords. So the takeaway here is don't do it unless you're willing to experiment. And if you are willing to experiment, get ready for things to not work as well as you would expect, but also get ready for surprises. And when you do come across something like this, pay attention. And maybe there are competitors that are more likely to turn into your downloads versus others. Maybe there's some brand recognition, or maybe there's the opposite of brand loyalty, brand disloyalty. And I don't think we're at the point where people go into the App Store, or maybe tell me if this is your experience. People go into the App Store just like they go into Google and look for alternative for something that they're already using. But if that's not happening yet, that will happen in the future, just like it has on the web. So that can become more of a thing. Have you experimented with alternative, the keyword like competitor name and alternative?
Yes, but mainly for iOS. This ties into a comment by Faraz as well. So don't do this for Google Play. Don't show the keywords. Don't mention it. The reason why it's possible for iOS is because you have the invisible keywords field. Nobody's gonna see it. You just rank for it.
Yeah.
Right. And then when I experiment, I actually spy on the specific brands first, and then try to extract as much insight as possible. Try to make sense of it.
Makes sense.
Is this a good opportunity? Does it make sense? Would people would my app stand a chance to convert users by ranking for these competitor keywords by other brands? And also it would be good to have a look at your users as well, because there are multiple different types of users. For example, one type would be full of users who know exactly what they're looking for. For example, if they search for TikTok, they know exactly they are looking for TikTok.
Yep.
But for other users, maybe they use the keyword because they don't know better.
Yeah.
Maybe they can just like, maybe TikTok is just their top of mind kind of brand.
Yeah, very true.
Right. So by using that keyword, they are actually, what they mean by using that keyword is show me similar apps to TikTok.
Show me video, video apps or short video apps, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So then, sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
So then it would be a better idea to expand your keywords into different variations based on your kind of initial seed keyword. So from TikTok, there could be TikTok, and then there could be apps similar to TikTok or apps like TikTok, right? And then if you see there's a high volume of keywords like the second case, then you stand a pretty good chance. Yeah, because they are more exploratory, or they are exploring.
Yeah, they're open to trying new things. That actually makes a lot of sense. So an easy way to see the downloads that you need for each competitor, or downloads that you need for each keyword, is to pop them in Keyword Inspector, a tool that's part of our platform. And so I use that very often, both to get an idea of how many downloads I need, but both to associate where the keywords need to be in the name and subtitle, or the name on the Google side, in order to get ranked higher, because it's not always just the downloads. It's a combination of keywords, keyword placement, and downloads, and download velocity, and some other things too. But for the most part, that's that. And so it's really easy in some cases to see that things like Uber Eats here in the US, or Postmates, I think those would be the kind of apps where you can put in Uber Eats and then you get Postmates and you're okay with it, because you just want food delivered. You don't really care about who's giving you food, as long as they have food and you're hungry. But then in some cases, maybe like TikTok, you know your friends are on TikTok. They're not on PickPok or on Schmickpok or on anything else that does video. They're not on Instagram either. They're really just on TikTok. So for Instagram to buy search ads or to optimize for TikTok may not yield the right results. Maybe this is too extreme of an example, just because everyone knows Instagram and everyone knows TikTok. But in your case, in the case of most apps and most developers that I believe are listening now, it's probably not as extreme. So either experiment and get ready for surprises, and surprise could be positive or negative, or stay away from it in general. I saw an interesting question that's kind of related to this from Brian, who's asking, do you have any tips on a localized app and its ASO strategy? I'm not sure what you mean on a localized app, but if you're thinking about localization, this is really the same thing. And so we just said the keyword placement, the keywords, and the downloads, and you can do that by country. So if you want to know if shopping works in Germany just as well as it works in the US, you can see if you can search for shopping or the German equivalent of shopping. In Germany, see the downloads, see if the apps at the top actually localize their name. And based on that, you can see if you need to localize or not. Because if they are and you're not, good luck getting ranks. But if no one's localizing, you can probably get away from it. Or opportunity, localize, and you'll get ahead of everyone else much more quickly. So it comes back to pretty much the same thing.
I
Now,
agree.
yeah, I think the idea that every market is just is separate, is siloed, but they all share the same template of what it takes to rank gets you thinking about localization, not in a should I extend localizations, is should I actually target that market, which are pretty much similar questions, but they take on a life of their own because you now need to think in keywords in a different language, and you now need to think about the combinations. And one thing that we haven't talked about yet is keyword popularity, because a keyword might seem like it's interesting and it may not have a lot of competition and it may not take a lot of downloads to get in the top 5, but maybe 10 people are looking for it on an average day, and the maximum potential you have is 10 downloads, and that's if you get all of them. So really, you want to not look at those first, only as a super last resort. Um, Ideally, never, but only as a super last resort. And so you have to think about now multiple planes, where one is how popular is a keyword, does anyone care about it, but then two, how attainable is it for my app. And as you try to balance both using keywords in the name and their position, then you can really get the most juice out of it. So competitor names are one way to try and find gems in this. Moving the keyword to the front, to the back, all those are techniques, but the template is still the same. And we're going back still to needing to look at competitors. One thing that I also like to do when I do that is to look at who the competitors are based on a competitor name. And so I'll put in an app name into the search as opposed to a keyword and see who else comes up, which means one, who's optimizing for that keyword, and two, who the algorithm thinks is competing. And based on those, you can also tell a little bit if there are any reasons for you to be aggressively targeting a competitor or not. So going beyond benchmarking, and now that you have kind of an understanding of how many downloads you need to get in, how do you approach using competitor keywords to try to come up with keywords for your own app?
I actually refrain from actually targeting the keywords themselves, but spy on the apps, because then it's kind of dangerous.
Yeah.
Number one, I can't really show these words. I can't really mention them without getting the app banned or penalized by Apple and Google. And number two, I only have up to 100 characters in the
Yes.
tiny little invisible keywords field on iOS to make use of them. So I would expand that, the horizon, and spy on the apps themselves and see what other apps, generic keywords, non-brand keywords, they are targeting inside of their metadata. What top keywords are they ranking for? And also what kind of keywords are they generating the most installs out of? And so on and so forth. And see, okay, what's the size of their opportunities?
Yeah.
And how much of it has my app been able to capture? What's still missing? Then what the missing part is actually the opportunity zone to test and explore.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you end up using reading their reviews in order to get ideas for what sort of things people are referring to them by?
Absolutely. I spy on them to see what kind of features or values or any other topics that their users are not happy with. And then I'm just gonna, well, it really depends on whether or not my app is also bad at that or better at that. Also, taking that into consideration, is that kind of value or feature a kind of unique selling point that could help my app stand out? And if that's the case, I would just use that as a leverage, showcase that in my, say, App Store videos or screenshots, just to show the market that, hey, we are a much better app, because whatever you're not happy with our competitors, we are so much better in. Come over here, and so on and so forth.
And
So
you bring
yes,
up
I spy on them hard.
And you bring up a good point again. That's the point you started with, that you're not necessarily just you're not looking for the good stuff. You're looking for the bad stuff. And in the beginning, you look for the bad stuff about yourself. What can you improve? But now you can leverage what the competitors can improve. And if they're not improving fast enough, and you have already improved past them, you should show off. And you can use that to your advantage through screenshots, through videos, through your description, through pretty much everything else. So the way I look at competitor keywords, and by that I mean the keywords where they rank, not their keyword list, is kind of the same. So I look for where they rank well, but I also, if I put them all side by side and I see which ones competitors are not, where there are gaps, meaning something that I'm ranking my app maybe not so high in, but they're not ranking at all, and then I know that I can try and push that up either through different variations of that keyword or something like that. So when you look at keywords competitors are ranking in, how deep do you usually go? If they're in the top 10, is that the cutoff? Is it in the top 20?
It's all a matter of prioritization. So for example, if you're managing a backlog of 500 keywords, then it doesn't make sense if you start first with those keywords. You would prioritize generic keywords, other better keywords first. And then when you're down to the last 10%, then you're running out of ideas. Then it will be a good time to consider, okay, I still have some space here. Should I prioritize some of the competitor keywords, or should I not? Should I press on other low volume keywords, like 5 or 6 points of search popularity, and hope for the best? Maybe every day, if that keyword is searched by 5 to 10 people, maybe that's enough. Maybe that's not. Maybe in some cases you target a few very competitive keywords and then you just get stuck at position number 25. But the keyword is the popularity score of that keyword is so high, ranking at position number 25 still gets you 100 installs per day. Then it's still better.
Yeah.
So then at the end of the day, it's still a matter of prioritization. So spying on the competitors gives you a better kind of sense of context, as in, what are they targeting? Am I missing out on anything? If I look at a keyword, am I missing out on anything? Are they being aggressive to rank for these keywords? What are my chances? And that's it. So that's the background kind of side.
That makes so much sense. So much sense. So taking this maybe a step forward, we also talked about assets. You mentioned assets before, and you look at competitors' assets to get a feel for how they do what they do and how you can improve beyond them. How much time do you spend on asset optimization and A/B testing, since it's kind of easy on Google Play, or doable on Google Play, and changing colors and changing fonts and changing the labels?
That actually takes up most of my time on a daily basis, because A/B testing is not just A/B testing, is a conversion rate optimization strategy. So your long-term plan, and then you use A/B tests to validate your ideas. And no ideas also validate your ideas and hypotheses, and no ideas and hypotheses are born equal. Some of the ideas are like long-term concepts or stories or directions. For example, if you want to go for a kind of structured storytelling approach for 8 up to 10 of your screenshots, right? You start with the beginning, the body, and the end, and then you test it. You're not going to be able to test it in 1 or 2 iterations. You're going to have to build a long-term kind of plan, and then you peel it down over time up to a point where you just change one element at a time, and then you learn better. But before that, you need to validate the entire strategy, right? So that would be what we call a directional kind of test. And sometimes you have some ideas, you test it, you have a win, loss, or tie result, but there's just no way to really make sense of it. For example, there may have been a seasonal change along the way. You're just not aware of it. So then the context, the situation, or the circumstance behind the scene may be the factor influencing the test results. So you also need to think of a plan for the sort of situation, like give yourself a kind of reality check or
Yeah.
sanity check as well. And then at the end of the day, of course, it's down to the tactical tests where you just, test whatever delivers or whatever increases your conversion rate. So all of the planning actually takes most of the time. And then beyond that, of course, you have to talk to the artists. For example, if you're optimizing for the text assets, you talk to the copywriters, translators. If you have to optimize for the videos, then you have to talk to the videographers, video producers, and animators, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, one of the most important kind of stakeholders I have to deal with every day would be the designers for graphic designs and so on and so forth. And then it comes to the operational kind of stage where you just upload the assets, run, monitor the results. So it's pretty big.
Yeah, that sounds like it's a lot of what you do. And I think that's actually really valuable because one, most people look at those screenshots immediately. So the keywords is what gets someone to see the app. But then it's really the screenshots that convert that person to a download in my experience. And there's also a complete connection between keywords that are used to bring people into the app and also the keywords that are used in the screenshots. Because if I'm coming in, my keyword is really an intent. Unless I'm using the brand name or something similar to that, it's really my intent is, in the case of Uber Eats or Postmates or DoorDash, food delivery. I want food delivered. I'm hungry. And so as much as I see food delivery or whatever the keyword that I ended up using that gets me to that page, I see on the screenshots, I associate the two. I say, well, I wanted food delivery. They're saying food delivery. Boom, bingo, download. And as you change your keywords, you should also think about the impact that it has on screenshots as well. So also as you change your story, you have to make sure that those keywords align so you don't lose the views and at the same time you don't lose the conversion rate. So that's very interesting. As far as A/B tests always have this sense of uncertainty because you're not sure that what you're testing for is actually going to play out the same way long term. Do you use statistical significance as a way of saying if it's not statistically significant, I don't care about the results? Or do you use the human element to say, well, I feel like this is better, even if it's not statistically significant, I'm going to do it?
Actually, I try to mix them. So statistical significance is absolutely important, but then at the end of the day, whatever kind of result it shows in the A/B tests is correlation.
Yeah.
It doesn't reflect the causal impact of whatever I'm testing. So then based on the kind of statistical results, I use that to answer questions like what's happening? What did I change? How did the users, when they see it, respond to it? And so on and so forth. But then at the end of the day, it's also a matter of a question of trust. Do I trust it enough by looking at the statistical significance and by looking at the test results? Do I trust it enough to apply it? Right. So I'm not gonna, or I try not to take it for granted. But then I ask myself a second layer of question: do I trust it enough? What else might have been, interfering into the results? What should I be looking out for, and so on and so forth? And if I'm not sure, I'm gonna run a test again later.
Do you make any changes when you run the test again, or do you just run the same thing again and hope to see better results?
I run it again, but I'm not going to hope for a better result. I'm just going to scan through the background to see, okay, now, for example, I'm working for a shopping app. So Black Friday is very important, right? So what I usually do is to use the same kind of concept or idea, produce the assets, upload it, run a test before the season, during the season, and then after the season, again, absolutely the same, just to know, okay, number one, when does the season actually start and end? And number two, when I see a win, loss, or tie result, is it because of the idea that I just made use of, or is that because of a change in the seasons? So at the end of the day, the operations are the same, but what I'm looking at in order to draw the insights would change. And also tying back to competitive intelligence, I look at the competitors, the other apps as well, for the same ideas. If they have been using it, if they have been testing with them, if they have been applying these ideas and it works for them, Why is it not the case for my app? There has to be something wrong, and there has to be something else.
Yeah.
So that's again another layer of kind of insights or question I ask myself. And then maybe they can teach me something. Maybe the other apps, maybe the competitors, they can teach me something. Maybe it's not the idea. Maybe it's just more suitable for their brand and not our brand, and so on and so forth.
That that makes so much sense. Your feedback is so valuable, Ben. I have to say, that's what's
Thank you
going on
so
in my
much.
head right now. For everyone who's listening, this is really great advice. So let's take a few questions because I see we've piled on some. An easy one is, can you track the App Store visits and see the conversions to downloads and Appfigures? The answer is yes. You can see that across the sales reports, the usage reports, in the secondary and primary metrics on the chart. So you can see how those align together. That was an easy one. And then we have a first question. How important is it to reach top 10? If I get stuck in top 24 keyword, should I change it to something else? I think we answered that before and we said, yes, you probably should. What is your take on this, Ben?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think a few years ago, there was a survey or a research into how much of the installs the different apps ranking at different positions take out of the full pool of installs, and the one ranking at position number one basically just takes 65, 70, even more percent of the installs, and it scales down exponentially if you go down the line from position number 1, 2, 2, 3, 4, 5. So at position number 10, you already have just a fraction of the installs. So outside of number 10, I would say you basically don't stand a chance to get any installs at all. So that would be a good time to move on.
I agree. That makes sense. Next on the list, we have a question. Should you localize your product description in all languages, even if your app isn't localized in that language? That's a good one. What do you think?
That's a good one. Well, if your product and or service is not offered in a particular language, then I mean the problem I have with this is what I mean the service itself, right? The core thing is not offered to them, then it probably wouldn't make sense to appeal to them and offer them something you don't really offer them, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But for
I
right.
think
So sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, if you go down the line, like to other kind of parts of the funnel, say retention, engagement, monetization, I would say it is not going to make sense. So the user is probably not going to stay for long. They're not going to be engaged. They're probably not going to like the app as a product. So so for KPIs like monthly, daily active users, you're going to see some damage there. But for the sake of converting traffic into installs, it would make sense. They're not going to stay, of course.
That's spot on. So people are going to read it. I think when people read something in their own language, it's always easier to convert. One, because they understand it better. So if there are any nuances in the language, nuances in translation, they feel more comfortable with it. But as soon as they open the app, unless it's an app that doesn't have any sort of text for whatever reason, it's an app that uses emojis for all the buttons. They're gonna have that sort of disconnect, and on Google Play, that's actually going to hurt you because even if they're just not using the app or if they delete it immediately, it's going to tank your ranks. And so you don't really want to do that unless you can translate the app. If the app is not really text heavy, you might be able to get away with quick translation, and that should be fine. So it might be worth testing it if your app is not text heavy to translate the whole thing, both the description and the app itself, into maybe the language of your largest market that isn't speaking the language the app is in, which could be the US, so English. And if that
Also,
works, continue to go down the list. Go ahead.
Also, the risks kind of vary across different countries. I mean, if most of the people in a particular country or market that you are appealing to speak English, then I would say it's more or less safe. Otherwise, it would be risky.
That's very true. I've seen many apps succeed with not translating in countries like Germany, where English is very common and very well spoken, but then not as much in countries like Poland, where Polish is much more prevalent. And there are more countries like this where you would see English as being more accepted, where in others it's not as accepted. So it really depends on the country too. Okay, next on the list, we have a lot of questions. So if you want a question that is on the list answered, thumb up it, just so we know that there's more interest in it. Otherwise, we'll try to go through a list, I guess, as quickly as we can. So Franz is asking, is it true that if your app name is Rain Rain Sleep Sounds, you rank better for rain than if it was just rain sleep sounds? I believe the answer to that is no, because if rain was the first keyword in your name, and now it's still the first keyword in your name, you're not really doing much, and the duplication is eliminated by the algorithm. So,
but I would say test it anyway, remove it, add
yeah.
it, but then document like a longer period of time. Also, yeah, sorry, forgot to explain a bit further. For iOS, it's an absolute no. There's no point repeating keywords, but for Android, for Google Play, maybe it makes sense. There's no way to tell because it's so the search ranking algorithm from Google is so elaborated, so advanced.
Yeah.
So maybe it believes that it's more relevant. Not sure. There's only one way to find out.
Yeah.
Test it.
I think really, and the biggest takeaway from all of this is always be ready to test things. So
Absolutely.
if you're thinking, should this work? Even if common wisdom says no, give it a try. There's really very, very little you can hurt if you're willing to undo your changes quick. Unless you just change your app's name to emojis, and then I think you'd be in trouble. But as long as you do things that make sense for your app and for your brand, experimenting is probably the best way to go. It might take a little bit longer to get results because you can't just test something and tomorrow have an answer. But if you have that sort of experimental mindset, I think you're going to end up with better results over time.
Also, it's the best way to get your assumptions out of the way.
Yeah.
Don't assume, just get a validation. Even if it doesn't make sense, rationally speaking, I mean, this brings back to a very recent test that we did internally at EDLO. So we have multiple different brand colors, and the one we hated the most yielded the best results in the A/B tests. Everybody struggled to understand why, but at the end of the day, if it resonates better with the users, we stick with it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't make sense, but it works.
Test. There's a question from Devon who's saying, will there be data for Mac App Store and Appfigures? And the answer is yes, in the future. That's something we're exploring. I think the Mac App Store is still an interesting place. But now that more iOS apps can appear on Macs because of the M1, that will become something a little bit different in the future. Soren is asking, is there any tool to find out what is missing in the app? I don't think so. I think that's more qualitative than anything else. If you're thinking, can something tell me if I'm doing ASO correctly, then there are a few basic rule of thumbs that you can follow, and you'll know this yourself, meaning if you are using all 10 screenshots, if you are using all 30 all 30 characters, or as close as possible in your name, if you have a subtitle on the iOS App Store, that sort of stuff, that's easy. But if there are missing features that you have to know the app very well, and you have to look at the competition, see what they're bragging about, what they're showing off with, and see what they're missing, and then read the reviews and see what their users love and what their users hate. If you don't have what their users love, and you have what their users hate, add what their users love, and then highlight that in your screenshots. The other way around too. So it's really all about that. What's missing is for you to tell more so than for a tool to tell you. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely. Also, if you're really deep into the topic, you can build your own tool. Basically, use some Google Sheet or Excel and then map out the entire competitive landscape, spy on them, and see, okay, how many assets all of the other apps have, and how many do you have, and then highlight what's missing.
Yeah.
That's one way to do that.
I love that mindset. It's always what's missing, what can I do better, really, and to fill in that gap. So you always have to think in that sort of, not what should I do, but what can I do? That's great. So Lucy is asking, our app title competes with 8 other apps, IP-based, similar genres. We include the IP and also puzzle in our game title. But in searching the IP in puzzle, my app comes up third or fourth. Is there a solution to helping rank better? I have recently looked at puzzles, and I know it's very competitive, but it looks like you were going to say something, so go for it.
I would say if you've tried everything and it doesn't improve your KPIs. So make a list of or make a map of keyword ranking factors. Say best KPIs would be retention rate, uninstall rate as a negative factor, conversion rate, your installs, sheer amount of installs, your installs velocity, as in how fast you gather, you acquire new users, and so on and so forth. And then benchmark all of these KPIs against your competitors if you can spy on them and see, okay, how far behind are you? Then based on the distance, you can basically estimate why you get stuck at your current position.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point because you're stuck for a reason. It's not you're stuck because the algorithm doesn't like you or Apple decided that you should just be fourth forever. There's something that those competitors that are up above you that they're doing, and you just have to figure out what it is. It's possible that it's really just purely number of downloads, but it's possible that it's something else. It's the position of the keyword. It's the velocity of downloads on weekdays. Um, yeah, so you can use something like Keyword Inspector to get started and see who's above you and why with an X-ray of their downloads, their ratings. Maybe they update the app more often, which sometimes factors in. And then beyond that, you can read the reviews and see how you can take those and improve your app to the point where you're ranking not only because you did a better job with ASO, but also because your app is 10 times better than theirs, which is what Binh was saying earlier today. There was a comment in the chat that I wanted to bring up about how our content is great, but this conversation with Binh is the best. And I write all of our content, and I tend to agree. This is a really good conversation. So again, thank you, Binh, for sharing all of this.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so next we have a question. I noticed you didn't mention the character limit for the long description. Does it matter for ASO or not?
For iOS, no. For Android, yes.
Yeah,
because for iOS, the keywords you add the keywords or the words you add into the long description, as well as the promotional text, which is also 170 characters, which is quite significant if you compare that with the title and the subtitle.
Yep.
But these are not indexed for keywords.
Yeah.
So they are good for up to a certain extent for conversion, but not for keyword ranking. But it's absolutely necessary for Android. Basically, from my perspective, for my current projects, the Play Store long description is our main kind of place to put keywords there because it's too risky to compromise the appealing copywriting for the title and the short description. Right. So when it comes to the keywords, then we will prioritize the long description.
And that's there are so many also techniques to do that properly for Google. So Google, for example, looks at the first few sentences of the description before they look at everything else. Google also looks for the repetition of keywords. But in addition to repetition, which they don't look for in the name and subtitle or the name and short description, they look for repetition of slightly different keywords that are very similar. And I think that's one that I haven't seen enough developers actually use. And that's also because it gets very difficult to write a 4,000 character long description that is targeting those specifically. But one thing to keep in mind is that the description on the iOS side is still important because some people do read it. And I hate the idea of using the name and the subtitle just to stuff keywords because ultimately you're optimizing for Apple and Google. You're also optimizing for the downloader. And they're real people. And so if you're writing something where it's a list of keywords separated by a comma for your subtitle, it's just going to look iffy. And so you might get the view. So someone might find you, but they may not actually turn into a download. So is that really beneficial? I don't think so. But something to keep in mind. I think we have time for just a couple more questions because somehow time ran out. I guess time flies when you're having fun, as they say.
Absolutely. So much fun.
There is a question from Devon about using competitor keywords in the name if they're high popularity and low competition. I think this ties back into the answer from before. So experiment with it, because even though you might be ranking for it, it doesn't mean that it's going to turn into a download, regardless of competition and popularity. So obviously you can aim for the ones that are popular and low, not as competitive first with your experimentation, but experiment. The next question we have is about ranking for a keyword or the plural of its keyword. The question is, while doing better than our competitors, our app ranks way worse than them for some keywords, but only in the plural form. For example, track book keywords, the app ranks on the first place, but track books is number 50. So
Mhm.
in general, the algorithm pluralizes for you, but my easiest answer, and you can take this one as well, Ben, is look at the popularity. If track book is a very low popularity, maybe that's why you're ranking number one. But track books is a much higher one, then it's more competitive and you're not really doing well in it. It could also be the other way around, where you're doing really well in your category and your competitor isn't. So look at the popularity and then do what needs to be done. In that sense, how would you answer this?
I would agree. I would also like to add two more things. Number one is be careful with the term waste. I know, generally speaking, technically speaking, theoretically speaking, yes, it's a waste, but in most cases, not all cases. So it's always good to test. Two ways to test it. Number one, the most direct way or the quicker way is to go to a keyword tool like Appfigures and track the number of apps ranking for both keywords. If they are pretty much the same, then you can safely assume that Apple treats both of the keywords the same, then that will be a waste. The second way to test it is to replace one keyword with the other. So replacing books with book and vice versa, and see if it makes a difference. If there's a difference, it's probably not a waste. Maybe they are treated separately as different keywords. That's one thing. The second thing is also be careful how you conclude your app is better than the competitors, maybe installs wise, maybe conversion rate wise, maybe even retention wise. But what about other factors like your install velocities? Like, for example, if you have more installs on the long run than your competitors, but then recently they just boost their acquisition campaigns efforts. So they get more keywords, they get more installs so much quicker, then that would be a problem for you. Then other factors that I think a lot of people tend to overlook is the ratings, the average ratings, the ratings count, and also ratings velocity. Like how many new ratings from new users did you get per day or per hour? Like how much how fast are you acquiring them? If that makes sense, and so on and so forth. So there's so much more than just like a few core KPIs that could affect your ranking. And maybe you're better than your competitors in a few areas, but for the rest, maybe they're so much better. So I would be careful there and doing more extensive competitive research.
That makes a lot of sense. Also, I just checked the popularity of track book and track books. And what Ben was saying is actually spot on. So track book and track books rank very lowly on popularity. They're both a 5, but track book has 1,000 apps competing over it on the Apple side, and track books has about 150,000. And so there are obvious differences between the keywords, and that's probably why you're ranking well for one and not for the other. Competing with 150,000 apps is different than competing with 1,000. And I think the last one before we leave, and if you stick around at the end, there's a small surprise. I'm not going to say what it is yet. There's a question that repeated a few times that I saw here, and that's about the frequency of updates. I saw it for Google and I saw it for Apple. I think the question at the top right now is for Apple. But how often do you make changes to your keyword list, your assets, your name?
For iOS, I would say as fast as possible, as frequently as possible, but it then depends on the developers,
Yeah.
depends on how often they can update the app release because everything ties into their new app update. But I would try to speed it up as fast as possible. For Android, I would slow down a little bit because the algorithm takes longer to respond to your changes. So I would say do once every month for Android, and as fast as you would like, as you afford the time to prepare for iOS.
The changes on iOS do come a lot more quickly, and we track ranks every hour. So if you put out an update, you can probably see movement within a few hours until it propagates to the apps, to all the app stores. And it's definitely, I've seen that happen before. Whereas on Google, it takes a while. Google is sluggish. I think in general, also Apple cares about velocity over the last few days, and Google cares about less velocity, more totals in that sense, and that's why you see the difference between those two. So that is good advice. Okay, last one. How do you spy on keywords or competitors in general if it's a foreign language to yours? Um, Using tooling would be my easiest solution because that's how I do it. Would you agree, Ben?
Yes, absolutely. I don't speak a lot of languages either, but at one point
Yeah.
in time, I did keyword optimization for 11 languages without speaking a word. Reason, I'm not a genius. I'm a mortal, but the tool I was using offered a sort of integration of Google auto translation. So
Yeah.
I just press on a button, everything is automatically translated into English. Then it's going to become a breeze. So
Yep.
then tooling, tying back to your answer, tooling is basically everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are working on automated tooling, automated translation as well. But we also do tracking for keywords in other languages. So if you pop all those competitors into the the competitor keyword report, you will, and you select the right country, you will see all their keywords in other languages. And so you don't even have to go in and translate your ideas from English or your keyword list from English. You can just take their keyword list in whatever language that it's in and quickly see all the stats. So what's popular, where they're ranking, without having to do any work, any inserting of a keyword. And I think with that, we're over time, but I think we should cut it here. We should definitely do this again. This was really great. Thank you, Ben, for all your feedback and all your advice here. I think I'm not the only one who will say this, but this was really great.
Thank you so much for having me. I
And
had a
thank you, everyone.
blast myself.
That's great to hear. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Like I said, surprise in just a few seconds. And we will be doing this again in less than a month. We're moving to 2 of these live webinars a month in March. So keep an eye out for an email from me in the next few weeks. Thank you again, Binh. This was great. And thank you for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day or evening or night, wherever you are.